Good morning. Today we finish Psalm 19, which was from yesterday, and then read 20, 21, and 22. And I'm going to focus mostly on Psalm 22, but briefly on the others. Psalm 19 is a hymn of praise to God. You know, the hymns are telling the story of God. The firmament proclaims his handiwork. You know, the heavens and the earth are proclaiming and showing God's grace. Day to day pours forth speech. So the heavens and earth speak on a daily basis, continual basis of God's magnificence, and they show us, you know, the handiwork of God. You know, as in the beginning He created, and says there is no speech, nor there are words, yet their voice is not heard. Their voice goes throughout all of the earth, and so we can't help but see God in nature, in the heavens and the earth, and in all of the wonders that are there. And he talks about, you know, in the heavens He'll set a tent for the sun. You know, as the sun sets in the evening, you know, the psalmist pictures that as the tent for the sun to sleep in until it rises again in the morning as it comes back up. You know, it comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy, you know, full of splendor, full of grace. And we all know how beautiful sunsets and sunrises can be sometimes. And other times, you know, just kind of, you know, not too much there. But, you know, when the sunrise and the sunset in there, I mean, when the clouds are just right, and, you know, you get such beauty there. And so the heavens and the earth are proclaiming the Lord. And in verse 7 says, the law of the Lord is perfect. The decrees of the Lord are sure. And so God doesn't expect us to do anything that's, you know, the laws are perfect. I mean, they're there to lead us and to guide us in proper living. They're not there to lead us astray. I mean, the laws, if we follow the laws, we're going to be on the right track and on the right path. You know, the love of God, the rules of God, or it says, are more to be desired than gold. And then the last verse of Psalm 19 is one that we hear often. Sometimes pastors will begin their sermon with it or end their sermon with it. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer, in whom I trust. I mean, I think about, I add that, in whom I trust. It's not written in this Bible, but let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Think, you know, if each person could do that, to let the words of their mouths and the meditations of their hearts, you know, their thoughts and their deeds and their words and their actions be acceptable to God. What a wonderful place the world would be. Psalm 20 is a prayer for victory in battle, asking God to lead and guide and intervene on behalf of the king. And Psalm 21 is basically a thanksgiving for victory in battle. You know, in your strength the king rejoices, O Lord, and in your help how greatly he exalts. You know, so he's praising God for assistance in the battles. And so often in the Old Testament battles that we would see that, you know, God was on the side of the Israelites, or sometimes God delivered the Israelites into the hands of their enemies. But in this instance, as David was, for the most part, faithful to God, God was with David, and God led David's armies to great battles, to victories that David realized that it was because of God. And, you know, we had examples as we read through the Bible so far of God saying, you know, I don't want you to have this many men. I want you to go with a small amount of men, so you can see that it was my hand that led you and guided you, and it was my hand that delivered the enemy into you. Not so that you can say it was your own doing or because of your own might and your own strength and your own men, but God led them so many times in victory. And verse 8 says, your hand will find out all your enemies. Your right hand will find out those who hate you. You will make them like a fiery furnace. And so the Lord will swallow them up in his wrath. I mean, he's acknowledging the answer to the prayer of Psalm 20 basically is, he was looking for leadership and guidance and God's help in battle. And Psalm 21 is thanksgiving basically for that victory. Verse 12 says, "For you will put them to flight, and you will aim at their faces with your bows." It isn't with our bows. It isn't with my men. It is with your bows. So, David is acknowledging God in leading. And then, "Be exalted, O Lord, in your strength. We will sing and praise your power." So it's, God is God is who God is, and he was leading and guiding David, and David sang praises and thanks to God. Psalm 22, we're very familiar with the first verses of it because Jesus quoted them on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Those are the words that we remember. But it goes on, "Why are you so far from helping me? From the words of my groaning, oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest." What a feeling of lost, of being abandoned, of being, out totally on your own. It's a cry for help. Jesus had to have felt that abandonment by God, but yet, Jesus had just prayed shortly before this in the Garden of Gethsemane. As we read in the New Testament, he says, "Not my will, but your will be done." And he went through all of that, the pain and the excruciating humiliation, the humiliation and the excruciating pain. And then when he's on the cross, he felt this abandonment. But yet I always think in my mind that, since Jesus knew the beginning of Psalm 22, and he knew so much of the scriptures, even though he hadn't studied under anybody familiar or famous, that he must have known the rest of this psalm too, because the rest of the psalm, the next verses 3 and 4, the psalmist proclaims his knowledge of God's help for his ancestors. "You are holy and throned on praises. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted you and you delivered them. They cried to you and you saved them. In you they trusted and they were not put to shame." So we have that cry for help, and then we have the statement of the knowledge of God's faithfulness to God's people. And then starting in verse 6, he's acknowledging his own unworthiness. "But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others, despised by people. All who seek me mock me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads." And so again, it's, he's just pouring himself out, emptying his soul to the Lord. And, and sometimes we need to do that. And sometimes we do. I mean, hopefully we do that. We don't keep it within ourselves. We can, it's okay to pour out our anger at God. And it's okay sometimes to be angry at God. But within all of that, we know that God, just as verses 3 and 4 said, has always been faithful to his people. He hears his people, he leads his people, he guides his people, and we acknowledge our unworthiness. And so I think about Jesus on the cross again as I'm reading this Psalm 22, and we know that Jesus was not unworthy. Jesus, at his baptism and again at the transfiguration, the voice of God, "This is my Son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." So even though Jesus may have felt abandoned, he knew and he trusted that God was there. And at the end on the cross, he said, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." So it's, even though he had this feeling of loss and this feeling of separation from God, he knew that God was there. And he committed himself and his whole being into God's care and keeping. And that's where we find our blessings as well, when we commit ourselves to God and when we trust God and when we know that even though things aren't going exactly as we would want them to, that God is there. Starting in verse 9 again, praises to God. "You've been with me in my womb. God, you have been with me all along. You kept me safe on my mother's breast. Since my mother bore me, you've been my God. Do not be far, for trouble is near." But again, the psalmist is now realizing and stating that not only was God faithful to his ancestors in verses 3 and 4, but God has known him and watched him and kept him safe all of those times. And then again, verse 12, the bulls encircle me and trouble surrounds me. You know, here again comes this trouble of the world, this trouble that's going on. And verse 14, I'm poured out like water, my bones are out of joint. And I remember reading this, you know, at a Good Friday service as the altar was being stripped, and you come to that point, my bones are out of joint, and I'm poured out like water, my bones are out of joint, my heart is like wax, it's melted within my breath. You know, this feeling of just being nothing, having nothing left, giving all of your energy, giving everything you've got, and laying it on the line, and you are just there, totally empty. Feeling of helplessness. My mouth is dried up, my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs are all around me. You know, what a picture of loss and hopelessness. My hands and feet are shriveled. I can count my bones. You know, just there's nothing left. Nothing left. Verse 19. But you, O Lord, do not be far away. Come close to me. You know, come to my aid, deliver my soul from the sword, save me from the mouth of the lion and from the horns of the wild ox. You know, you who fear the Lord, praise him. And then verse 24, he did not hide his face from me, but he heard when I cried to him. And so again, you know, this statement of belief that in the midst of the pain and the sorrow and of feeling totally gone, the psalmist realizes that God hears him and God is there. Verse 27, the second part, all the families of the nation shall worship him. And then last part of verse 29, I shall live for him. Verse 31, and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying he has done it. So I mean, it starts out, you know, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It just, this total of a feeling of total loss. And here at the very end, it is turned around, and he knows, the psalmist knows that God hears, and that we will proclaim God to those yet unborn. And here we are, 2,200 years after Jesus. How many years after David wrote this psalm? 3,000 or better. But the word of God is still being taught to the unborn and proclaimed to those of us who live.